Welcome to the We've All Done It podcast. If you are struggling with some toxic work BS, you, my friend, are in the right place. Office politics are hard, and sometimes we are the fun in dysfunction. I am Kimberly Benoit, your host and author of We've All Done It, getting real about the role we each play in a toxic workplace. With over 20 years of leadership experience, and yes, my own toxic missteps, I will be joined by leaders just like you and I to explore common leadership situations that every leader finds themselves in at some point in their career. We discuss lessons learned in a judgment-free space because no matter how it feels, we aren't alone in our struggles. We all have our own BS, and we can support and learn from each other. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of We've All Done It. I am elated to have our guest today, Brent Robertson. Some call him, I think it's Yoda of the C-suite. I've read this, and so I know it's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait for you to participate. So, Brent, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. I'm looking forward to it.
So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about this Yoda-ness that you possess.
That's so funny. Yeah, Yoda of the C-suite boardroom. For the past 25 years, I've been working with leaders and teams to help them create catalysts within their organizations that allow them to perform beyond the benchmark. And what I mean by that is beyond the benchmark of their history or the benchmark of even what their industry says is possible, really achieving a level of sort of breakthrough performance. This last year has been really special as I've taken on this work over time. I decided to launch a whole new company specifically dedicated to advanced practices that are really designed to help leaders bridge the gap between where traditional programming ends and what's actually being called for leading an organization today, which is way beyond what any of us ever imagined organizations would become. The organization is called Generative, and I founded it, but it's been a lot of time in the making, and it really is focused on developing practices that allow people to really become force multipliers, meaning that they, through various techniques and awareness, can be much more mindful of how they're spending energy and spend energy in ways that has much greater effect. One of the things we'll probably talk about today is, the complexity and demands on leadership of a modern organization are so high that we tend to pay with our lives, our health and well-being, our family relationships, whatever it may be, just to maintain that position. It's overwhelming. And we see that it doesn't have to be that way, and have found ways in which we're able to equip leaders with practices and techniques that allow them to have much more leverage, and not just much more leverage, a much more meaningful leadership experience.
So just out of curiosity, where did your passion for this topic come from?
Well, it came as a wild fascination. My early days professionally were in the agency world, and actually launched a very successful agency about 25 years ago. And what we were really good at is, and maybe where the Yoda of the boardroom comes from, is really shaping language and narrative that informed brands that were aspiring for organizations to live into. And as we were going about this work, and we were really good at what we did, like we created these really beautiful narratives and stories that organizations aspire to live into, I started to wonder, well, who's teaching these organizations how to live into them? How do we actually embody these ideas and become who we say we are, as we aspire to go beyond ourselves? And that really opened up the doorway to an inquiry around and a fascination with what is it that causes or catalyzes outbound human performance? Around that same time period, about 15 years ago, I also met a community of others that are in that space, including the legendary Mel Toomey, who literally invented the only existing Master of Arts of Organizational Leadership program in the world, and a bunch of others that I was able to partner and mentor with over the years. So I got indoctrinated into a whole other field I didn't even know existed, that has captured my imagination ever since, and has really brought me to where I am today, which is really at the forefront of creating completely new programming around listening and leadership that really is all about, how is it that we can become more aware of these things we have access to but aren't using, and what would happen if we use them with intention and focus.
So first off, I think your observation, I've always been fascinated when you walk into organizations and they have beautiful wall art, is what I like to call it, which is, their values, their mission. But very quickly you can start to understand so few organizations actually live up to it. I think there's good intention when they create it, but to your point, I think there's a gap in or it's outsourced to somebody in the organization of like, hey, go figure out culture. And it's an internal person. I've seen that happen as well, and is as kind of like a side job. It's like almost like a project of how do we implement. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, because you and I have had some really great conversations, is the role of listening.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about this, about the issues of multitasking and listening. So I want to talk a little bit, because I think you have such a wonderful perspective on it, is tell me more about the power of listening, particularly when you're talking about the C-suite boardroom and what role that really plays.
Yeah. Well, I'll put it bluntly. Listening is the most leverageable asset a leader has at their disposal. And there's many reasons for it. One of the primary reasons is that listening is the foundation in which conversations exist. And so based on the condition of our listening will reflect the quality of the conversations our organizations are having. And of course, the conversations our organizations are having is what shapes our organizations. And so the key insight here is our listening is actually the place in which we have the ultimate leverage in the shape and performance and experience of our organizations if we just spent more time there. And of course, we're in a time right now where we're more distracted than ever for all kinds of reasons. This is welcome to the slowest day of your life, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, we've got all these pixels. We're in the throes of the attention economy. We've got the best and the brightest in the world trying to keep our eyes glued to our phones because there's so much money in it. So we have all these competing influences. And what it means is that most of us, if not all of us, are experiencing listening deprivation. And we are not taking the time to actually create space to allow things, new ideas, even people to come into existence. And so what if we looked at listening as a way to create space, and inside of that space, beautiful things can come into existence. And right now, because we're so busy and distracted, that leaders who actually prioritize listening are dramatically more successful, have more influence, and are experiencing a much more meaningful leadership experience. And as we all know, right, the tenets of great leadership almost always point to they're a great listener. I feel heard around them. And how does that relate to culture, right? I believe culture is the water an organization swims in. It is the nature of the human systems, right? Not the business systems, the human systems. And one of the intrinsic needs and desires of human beings is to be seen, heard, and appreciated. And the only way we get that experience is through listening. So organizations that prioritize listening are the same ones that are incredibly powerful places to work, and they're also higher performing.
So, because I've seen this a lot, and I actually teach this in some of my courses as well, especially when you're talking about engagement, right? The quickest way to kill engagement is to say you're listening, but everyone else around you knows you're absolutely not, because your eyes are glued to your phone, your watch, whatever. And the beauty of this is I think it doesn't just apply to work. I think this applies to the quality of all your relationships. It's the funny thing where you go into a restaurant and you look around the room to see how many people are actually engaging with each other at the table versus everybody's on their cell phone. But the question becomes so when we are in an environment, so we talk about the demands of this modern leader, we're wanting more things with fewer resources in a faster timeline. And so we have been told over and over and over again, multitasking is required in order to do what you need to do. Because otherwise, if you just sit and listen, how will you get everything done? So how do we counter that argument that I have to multitask? I can't just sit and listen to you, because then I will never finish the work in a day? Like, how do we start to turn the tide of this is more of a priority than maybe some of those other to-dos on your checklist?
Yeah. Well, it points to something that's really important, and I see a lot of leaders struggle with this, is the false assumption that the way we make progress is by doing. And doing is an important thing. And a lot of leaders got good at doing things, got good at doing things beyond what they were capable of, which gave rise to their title as leader. And so we can begin to be misled to think that the doing is where progress is made. But as we ascend into higher states of leadership, there's another dimension that is, I would say, way more important, which is being and how we be. And where I see a lot of leaders struggle is, all I did today was be there for my team. I didn't actually get anything done. I'm like, no, you actually provided what was needed, which was to be there and have your being be a catalyst for those around you able to accomplish more than they ever imagined. And so a little of that goes a long way if we stay present. Now, the research is clear and has been for many, many years. That's why it still amazes me the rhetoric of multitasking still exists. It's been scientifically proven by all of the greatest institutions in the world that it simply isn't feasible or possible, basically because we only have a 7-bit processor consciously operating, right? We have a very limited conscious processor, a pretty unlimited subconscious processor, but we're fundamentally limited to 7 bits. And in when that is the case, how can we possibly concentrate on multiple things at the same time? What's worse is, and again, it has a lot to do with our digital devices, is even the work of changing the interface that you're working with, right? You and I are on this Zoom call. I'm looking at your face, right? And so my brain is turning on certain processes and shutting off other ones to be able to be present with you. If I were to pick up my phone, even right now, it would cost a lot because my brain now needs to shut off all the things I was using to interface with you to interface with that device. And then a minute I glance back, it happens all over again. These are very expensive processes on our brain. And so this idea of, these devices, every time we get disrupted, right? If you're in a deep think or flow state, it takes 20 minutes to recover from a distraction. So no wonder leaders are feeling like, I can't seem to get anything done. Most of it is the culprits are all of these micro distractions that keep us from being able to focus our energy and attention. Like, we all know, like, you've got this big thing that's got to get done. And those moments where like 20 minutes and it's done, right? You're like, whoa, right? That's because you were fully focused and available. So, a lot of the practices that we teach is, how do we game our own neurology and physiology, behavioral science, all these kinds of things. We can structure our days in certain ways. One of the things I talk a lot about is if we prioritize our listening, then make room on your calendar to be there to do nothing but listen. And then protect other time where you can focus on things in the realm of getting things done and protect that time and have a structured day and actually be intentionally unavailable and then intentionally available fully. Man, it's a game changer. And of course, we've got all kinds of new AI tools and things like that that help automate that process where we don't have to think about it. It just automatically sets our day up for that. Anyway, just some of the things that are going on out there that has it be, why are we busier than ever? We have all these tools at our disposal, but I'm feeling more and more defeated, more exhausted. A lot of it has to do with the fact of us just interchanging all these interfaces and trying to juggle 15 balls at the same time instead of saying, you know what? No, right now, what's being called for and needed is my presence. And a little of my presence, 5 minutes of my presence, and you having an experience of clearly being listened goes a long way. It's a logarithmic, in fact.
Well, and it's so funny because I think about like being an early stage project manager very early on in my career. And the first things you're taught in facilitation is you create an agenda and you give people space, right? So we're going to brainstorm from this time to this time, no phones. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. So that's when you go check emails, check your phone, like without ever even talking as eloquently as you just did about the taxing of what's happening in your brain. The simple ability to allow people to turn off other stuff so they can fully be present is usually when magic happens. I think about strategic facilitation. When you structure it well, to your point, things can happen very, very quickly when everyone in the room agrees and sticks with what you're doing. I think we underestimate as people how much energy it takes
Yeah.
because we're so trained in it. I mean, I often would be amazed. I led a team of analysts, and sometimes I'd walk by their screens because they sometimes had 3 screens. So think about the number of interfaces, different programs that were going on at different times. I mean, the amount of mental energy, and that was part of what I did for them is I protected them. I didn't want them to have outside influence because I knew that just sucked the life out of them to talk to real people because this is where they needed to be. But I still think we often underestimate the strain of it and how that actually shows up. And when you talk about like that 5 minutes, if you give somebody 5 minutes, because that's also what I hear is like, I don't have time for everybody. How am I supposed to have time to give everybody attention? Then I would never get anything done. And I used to challenge the thought of, well, when you say give them attention, what are you meaning? Is
Yeah.
it have to be a hard 30 minutes? Are we saying a hard hour? Or are we saying, hey, like I control how I structure this and I can be present for you for 15 solid minutes. Let's go.
Yep.
You and
Absolutely.
me. Let's go. What how can I help you? What do you need from me? What do I need from you? And just 100%, like you can determine what that focused time looks like. I think we kind of make these arbitrary rules or just kind of how business has been done. And we forget that we can shake it up if we choose to.
Oh yeah. I remember the first time it really occurred to me around our ability to create whatever is needed is, the 9 to 5 concept of a workday is a very recent invention. If it's not working,
Yeah.
invent something else, right? And so we have the ability to do it. Going back to, why are organizations that prioritize listening doing so much better and such healthier places to work is going back to the notion of organizations that do this, and they put significant structure and expectations around the conversations they have. So,
Hmm.
in fact, I was just delivering a training recently on this very topic, and it is not an option to be on mute. Not an
Oh,
option. Like when you're on screen, you are off mute, you are on camera,
wow.
and you have minimized distractions, right? Your phone isn't on your desk, it's somewhere else. Your screen is maximized
Okay.
because we're about to have a conversation. I need all of you here because this conversation may only
Yeah.
need to take 15 minutes if all of you is present versus, we lock in an hour, we'll spend an hour no matter what. If we don't,
Yeah.
structure its freedom in this case to make it a priority, right? We spend our listening so casually and we're half in and half out of conversations. No wonder we're wasting so much time. And so it's, making listening a priority, setting conditions, significant conditions to get the best of each other in those conversations. Because, right, the math is this: conversations is what we talk about is what our attention is on. The conversations we have literally shape our experience because we live in language. And for leaders that understand this, it's a game changer. And that's what gave rise to the generative listening practice, is that we need to look at listening in a completely different way than just an amalgamation of skills that we wield from time to time. It's something else altogether.
So if you're a person, so say you're a leader listening out there, and you're like, this is rocking my world, totally rocking my world. Like I haven't even thought of it this way. I am my own worst enemy. Like, because I rarely know anybody who can't look at their phone, in any sort within like a 15-minute time frame. Like it's fascinating, and Apple Watches just make it so much worse. I call it like Pavlov's dog. It's really fascinating to watch. Um, but if somebody's is seeing this in themselves and saying, well, this is pretty interesting, what is the steps that somebody takes to say, okay, I want to be a more present listener?
Mm,
What is the way that they can drive awareness for themselves to
sure.
start to shift their behavior from what is to what they want to be this kind of leader that we're talking about that actually ends up with a more engaged, productive, um, quality team?
Yeah, love it. So let's just say the rabbit hole on this goes really, really deep, but I'll touch on a couple of fundamentals. Um, One of the fundamentals is, well, first off, it's a mindset to understand listening is my most powerful asset. Use it wisely. That's number one. But without that mindset, the rest of these techniques don't matter because if you don't believe that to be true, this is just other stuff to do, right? So that's number one. Number two would be build a practice of creating awareness of your condition as a listener. We're almost always compromised, distracted, whatever it may be. And so it's important to be self-aware of what's my condition right now as I enter into this conversation, and to be honest about it. And this is something that doesn't get done very often. Again, we casually run into each other and have conversations. One of the techniques I encourage people to take on is, before you run into that conversation, let's say you want to have a conversation with someone else, start with, here's my intention for the conversation I'd like to have with you. What this does is it instantly has it be that you're clear on the intention. And instead of them trying to guess what the heck you want to talk about, they have a clear understanding of your intention. But what it also does is it gives them choice to say, great, based on the intention of this conversation, I'm equipped to have it right now. Or I got a fire in the hallway. I can't have this conversation right now. I can't honor it. Can we get back to it at another time? This is an exchange of respect. And respect is something that is a byproduct of how it is we treat each other, right? And so if I treat your listening with respect by seeking permission and allowing you to say, yeah, I'm here for you or not, that's respect. But it also just cleans up all the noise around, well, what's the mystery we want to talk about? The second technique, that the follow-up to that is, let's just say somebody's coming to have a conversation with you, ask them before we start, tell me your intention for the conversation, and tell me what kind of listening would benefit you right now. What
Oh,
kind of listening would benefit you right now? Oh, you know what? I just had a struggle with a client. I just need to vent. Great. Now you can calibrate your listening accordingly, and you don't have to invest a lot of your listening to allow somebody to vent. They just need a place to land some stuff, right?
right.
Great. Or they may say, you know what? I've got this thing. I just can't see a way around it. Maybe you can help me think it through. Great. Gives you the choice again. I've got that kind of listening available. Or to say, I've got 3 minutes. Do you think we could have this conversation in 3 minutes? Yes, instead of what we often do, which is the Irish goodbye, which we try to sneak out of a conversation because our alarm's going off. We're going to get to our next meeting. So these are just some basic techniques that are demonstrations of treating listening as a precious resource. And
Yeah.
and the other one is, don't fake it. If you don't have it, tell the other you don't have it and get
Yeah.
back to it another time. Because here's the thing about faking listening. In fact, when I work with leaders all over the world, and one of the questions I ask them is like, what's your number one technique to pretend listening when you're not? And everyone laughs, and then they espouse 15 different things they do to pretend listening. I'm like, here's the thing when we fake listening, when we pretend listening when we're not. It sends a single, indelible, and powerful message to the other person: you don't matter. That's the
And you
only
always
message it
know.
sends.
They
You
know
don't
you're not
matter.
listening. That's
That's
the
it.
worst part. You're not fooling them.
That's right. Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. We've got we've got the savviest BS meters of all time, right? And in fact, when someone's not listening, it's subconsciously interpreted by it. Like, we know before they even know, before they can even use their technique, we already know they're not present.
yeah.
And all it says is, you don't matter. And so if that's the message you want to send to your team, fake listening. If you want to send a different message, prioritize your listening.
I love so much about that. And you talked about it in the sense of like these drive-by conversations, I like to call them. But I used to say all the time, like if I got a meeting invite and there was nothing in there, I would frequently push back and say, what is this about? Like I would never just randomly accept a meeting because I wanted to know what you needed from me. Was I the right person to be there? And so I had hard rules. And again, maybe this is my project management, my PMI background, but that was a hard thing for me is I never sent out an invite without clear expectation of what this meeting was about, what was the intended outcome, who else was going to be on the meeting, because I felt like, again, going back, it's the respect of someone else's time.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so whether it's a drive-by meeting or something that they're dropping on your calendar my favorite was always when they knew I was already booked and they would drop a meeting with no explanation. And just the expectation I show up, like, one, not only you're not respecting my time, but you're not allowing me to show up and be the best version of myself in that moment because there's no way for me to prepare.
Yeah.
Um, and the worst that I always said is, and this goes back to other things too, when you think about it, when people don't know what's expected of them, usually the worst option is what plays out in their head. is that I'm in
Absolutely.
trouble. I did something wrong. Like people rarely are invited to meetings with no explanation where there's a good outcome.
I use
So,
the adage, in the absence of understanding, we assume the worst.
correct.
Yeah.
And I say that like the worst version of whatever is going to play out for you. And so, again, going back just to simply being respectful of someone's time and attention, because you
Yeah.
know, the minute that invite drops, where is their attention going to go? Who else is on here? What is this really about? Um, so yeah, I love that because I think if we in a sense from listening, but just simply respect for each other, I think that's so incredibly important. And I love the fact that you give people the permission to say, I don't have it in me to have this conversation right now.
Yeah, for sure. You know,
Um,
one of the places that we engage with our clients is on we call it meeting hygiene, which is like how do we create a much more thoughtful approach to how we're using our meeting times.
yeah.
And it's amazing with a clear intention how few meetings are actually needed. And don't have a meeting without an intention, and don't write an agenda without an intention. It's amazing how little agenda in a meeting is needed if we're clear about what the heck the intention is. One
Yeah.
of the techniques that we deploy is for, let's say, your average leadership team meeting, add up the sunk costs of everyone's hourly rate and loss of business for that hour. Put that number on the whiteboard and say, great, this meeting is about to cost us $30,000. How do we justify the ROI of this hour? And
Yes.
if we can't justify the ROI, we're not having this meeting. That's a bold move, and it's amazing how powerful it is to be like, wow, because we casually spend all this time in these, hour block meetings. The average executive is wasting $100,000 a year in wasted meeting times. I mean, we save clients millions just through meeting hygiene techniques.
Well, and I think about like realistically, when you have most people I know that are still in corporate, their calendars are back to back to back to back to back. So you don't even get the full hour because what happens is they're never getting out on time, which means your meeting is never starting on time. And then once they get there, they're still mentally where they were, so they have to reset. So you're a good 15 minutes into your hour before that person, even if they have the best intentions of mentally being there with you, can actually show up.
Yep.
And that and again, the later you get in the day, the worse it is.
Oh yeah, one of the challenges that tends to be a sobering moment when I'm working with leaders is when I ask them who gets the best of your listening, and when was the last time the people you're walking your life out with got the best of you. Most of the
Yeah.
time they get the leftovers, if nothing, at the end of the day, and our relationships suffer
Yeah.
immensely because of that.
So I love this idea of meeting hygiene. And for that reason is I think we get it's so easy when you're in the grind to get that tunnel vision about we just have to get the work done. If I had a dollar for put your head down, put your nose to the grindstone, just get it done, just push through. I could retire. It would be a wonderful retirement. But the truth of it is I think that's where your culture, that is where your engagement starts to crumble. Is because again, we're looking when you look at your individual contributors, your frontline staff, they're always looking to the leadership to be like, well, who do I need to be in order to excel here?
Yeah,
And so by creating that different standard, um, I think it's so incredibly powerful because what you're doing is training your pipeline that something different is valued.
100%. And even, one of the most important aspects of my work is to assess the listening available in the client. This just came up in a meeting I had yesterday, which is, they're doing something unprecedented, which is designing a feedback loop for the leadership team. And there was a sort of a controversial question that was part of this survey that they were putting together. And I asked them point blank, I'm like, well, it's probably controversial because the system isn't ready to hear this. Would you say that's true? They're not ready to hear the answers to this question. They're like, no, we're not ready. Then don't ask the question until the
Ooh,
system is ready because it will cause damage.
oh, ooh, that's that I think is probably one of the most powerful questions I wish more teams asked.
Yeah.
Is if it's not culturally ready to make this transition, don't set the expectation it may come.
Yeah.
I've been in organizations where there was that disconnect, and it was always so painful Because when you weren't at the higher level, you're like, this is exciting. A great example that I think of all the time, the 50-hour meeting, the 50-minute meeting, right? So we're not going to do a full hour. And so many people like fully committed to it. And they're like, nope, we're going to do this. We're going to make all of our lives easier. And it was interesting who adapted it, but because leadership did not, everything beneath it crumbled.
Oh, 100%.
And it was just, and again, when you think about the hit that ultimately happens, when you come back to your engagement, your enthusiasm, that people really thought change was going to come and then it did not, was really devastating for a lot of folks.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a whole nother topic on the folly of leadership development, delivery mechanisms that often end up alienating those that got the development from everyone that didn't.
Well, and that was always a struggle that I had in doing this, is we bring these people in, we're teaching them all these great tools, tactics, strategies, but they're going back into a culture that hasn't embraced it.
Exactly.
And so it gets very difficult. Like if your boss does not align with how you're operating, you're going to struggle in being able to, for some things, move it forward. So I want to be respectful of your time. This has been great. I love this. We're definitely going to have you back because there's so much more to talk about. But I want to ask, so for anyone listening, if there's one thing that you would want them to take away from our conversation today, one thing that maybe they could think about, try, implement, or just sit and journal about, what would be that one tangible thing for listeners?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. I think it's important to remember this, that your listening is the greatest gift you could possibly give another human being. And someone else's listening is the greatest gift you could ever receive. It's because inside of that listening is where we have the experience of being seen, of mattering. And in a time where there's so little listening to go around, I encourage anyone that's listening to this right now, prioritize in the next 24 hours to bring your full presence to somebody that matters to you. Go out of your way to demonstrate, even with your physicality, like make yourself physically available, make yourself distraction free, and be wildly curious, particularly around people that you spend a lot of time with, where things may have fallen into routine. And remember, when was the last time you were the person you're walking your life out with got the best of you? What if you gave them that gift in the next 24 hours?
You might have just saved marriages.
Well, in fact, I have multiple instances of evidence that has absolutely been true, including about 2 weeks ago when I was delivering this and I got an email the next day said, "You saved my marriage." 100%.
It's so sad, but it's true. How you spend all this energy at work, and then when you come home, what do you have left for your spouse and your children, your partner? So very true. Well, Brent, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on the show and share your brilliance. We're going to have everything about how to find you, to connect with you in the show notes. But if there's one place you wanted people to find you, where would you want them to go?
Great. Go to our website, be-generative.com.
Awesome. And like I said, I'm going to have all the deets in the show notes. And if for some reason you miss it, you can reach out to me too. Thank you so much, Brent. We really appreciate having you.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of We've All Done It. I know your time is valuable. That's why I am for as little BS as possible. Hopefully today's episode has sparked some new ideas for you. If you would like to learn more about the We've All Done It leadership framework or how to work with me, please check out my website at KimberlyJBenoit.com. Until next time.